Welcome. This is the Enlightenment Show, and I'm your host, Laurie Schoenfeld. This is where Chicken Soup for the Soul meets the artist way with Nancy Drew. Our guest today is Chris Thomas, author of Unexpected. We're going to be chatting with him today all about his new release and what he learned about himself in the Elizabeth Smart case. Welcome, Chris.
Laurie, such a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to be chatting with you about your amazing book. It is sunshiny here in Utah.
Finally.
Yes. What do you like to do in the sun?
In the sun, I don't get out to do it enough, but I really enjoy fly fishing. I like to, I'm terrible at it, but I just like being out on a quiet river or lake and just the serenity and being away from it all is something that's pure bliss for me.
Mm-hmm. I have never been fly fishing, but just that setting that you set up, I can just feel like the wind and the water and just being with nature. Sounds fantastic.
Can't wait.
All right. Well, hope that you have a lot more of that, and we'll keep the weather sunshiny in Utah as our hopes. Yes.
All right. I'll hold you to it, Laurie.
Can you share with our listeners and viewers a brief synopsis on what Unexpected is all about?
Sure. So Unexpected is the backstory of finding Elizabeth Smart. I served as the family's publicist and then over time became a close confidant and was intimately involved in that. But it's a braided memoir in that I trace back lessons learned growing up, especially in the Latter-day Saint culture, and how that prepared me, what intuition was gained from that. And it was such an interesting journey having that opportunity to go back and realize, to really think about and realize how many people and how many experiences in life prepared me for that. And I believe all of us have that. It's not unique to me, but going through that journey and realizing it, I think if we all go back and look at our past, that we'll see lots of different cookies that maybe prepared us for that future experience.
Mm-hmm. Why now, Chris? 20 years after we find Elizabeth, did you write Unexpected?
Well, I knew once Elizabeth was rescued that I had a story, an interesting story to tell that really hadn't been told, and it just never felt right. A couple of years after, I kind of toyed with it a little, wrote some things, and it just never really was coming together. And then just before COVID, I had a speaking engagement, and the last minute they asked me to change things up and to make it more about veterans. And my frame of reference was my next door neighbor who was a forgotten hidden war hero who was an alcoholic. We had a very belligerent relationship. And so I shared our story and coming to understand and respect and really understand his sacrifice. And so during COVID, I wrote that story, which is kind of the braided part of this, which was my personal story. And at the end, I wrote an epilogue that traced it back to the Elizabeth Smart case. And I don't want to spoil it at all, but that last chapter was a big part of it that really just brought everything together. And my wife looked at it, and she's been on me for years. You got to write your Elizabeth Smart story. And she said, there's your book. It's these two together. I said, honey, that's never going to work. There is no way. And she just kept at me forever. Like, this character growing up is just like this character from the Smart case. And she started pointing things out, and I finally gave it a shot. And it took a lot of work to get it to that fashion. Because I don't think, and maybe Laura, you would believe differently, I don't really connect the dots in there. I don't say, hey, I learned this and now I applied this. Kind of let the reader come to those conclusions.
Mm-hmm. Going back to those nugget pieces for sure of like being a part of the experience versus, giving some time to breathe and then coming back to him. It's like a whole nother lens of view of things you couldn't possibly see in that moment, but you can now.
Absolutely. Having that time. And the process for me was very fulfilling in that I was able to go back and it's not clear in the book, but there were some places where there were some unresolved thoughts, issues, and able to just, okay, hold on, let's stop, let's push pause, let's look at this from three different angles, from 360 degrees, and what can I learn from this? Let me take myself out of this. And it was so enlightening for me to go through that process and to really see things. And there's no way I could have done that. I don't even think 10 years ago, really having that period, having some more life experience, really made it rich for me.
I want to give big kudos to your wife too. You need a support system when you are sharing your voice and you're going on a completely different creative venture. Having people around you that's your support system is huge. So thank you, Chris's wife.
Tremendous. And I've been so fortunate. I found somebody who is a good complement. She's very different from me, but being creative, I don't know, eccentric, maybe eccentric light or diet eccentric, kind of balance me out. And the great thing is she's never been pandering, always been very straightforward, which was really helpful in this project. Like, this doesn't work and this is why, or this does work. And so I felt pretty confident about things, having her as a partner in the process.
There are a lot of pieces that are in motion and movement when there's a missing persons case. Can you share with us a little bit about what that looks like?
Absolutely. And Lori, I think it's so interesting with Little Owl. I think you do. I've just started reading it. I think you do an interesting job in painting this picture. The Elizabeth Smart case, and I've had the opportunity to work on, I don't know, maybe a dozen missing persons cases in the last 20 years since. Hers was like on steroids. Because of the attention, very quickly she became a household name. There was intense media interest, but as one of the members of the Smart family said, it became reality TV that trumped reality TV. Every word that was being spoken, every look, every gesture, everything that they did was being second guessed and analyzed. And so, there was this almost circus taking place, and the Smarts were cognizant of that. We made a very deliberate decision that they would cooperate, even knowing that it was a bit of a circus, because they knew that that was the best tool for finding Elizabeth. And so they were deliberate in doing that. And in the same vein, how do we try to keep our message and keep Elizabeth front and center? How do we avoid all these sideshows that can detract from that? And that was a challenge. And that's a lot of what the book, the part about Elizabeth Smart is, deals with that and details a lot of those side pieces that, most people haven't heard about.
How did you support yourself, Chris, through the stress, anxiety, worry that you were constantly feeling, not only with the case, but different things that were personal for you outside of the case as well?
There's a lot of lessons learned there, and it's something I still struggle with. With my clients, I get involved with a client, especially in crisis, as though they're my own family or they're my own business, and have that level of passion. And so during that period, I just, it felt like nothing else mattered except for helping them to find her. The pain was so great, wanting to do something to fix it. And my self-care was terrible. You talk about my wife, the thing I hear most from people who've read the book is, wow, either your wife's incredible or you are so lucky she stayed with you. And they're not kidding, because I was a newlywed and it was a really challenging period, balancing what seemed like the most important thing in the world with a personal relationship, and self-care is something I still struggle with. I think I've gotten better at it, but during that period, it was full bore, very difficult to even take a breath without working on that case. And the people I was working with were doing the same thing. We were just also engaged and committed to finding her.
Do you feel like there was, for you and your surroundings, kind of a fight flight method of just go, we've just got to figure it out, don't ask questions type?
For me, it was really clinical. And I don't know that I necessarily at that time recognized that. I think later, having gone to the emergency room, I'm like, oh, I get how they work. I now understand, because there was a job to be done and there were emotions, but oftentimes, and there were periods where I would come home and just sob, just because it had built up so much, it was so pent up. But in the same period, in the same vein, I had to keep it together, and I had to keep functioning on a very high level. And so, that goes with trauma. And there's no question, when there's a missing child, most of the people that are close to that situation feel that trauma and feel this sense of urgency. Even weeks and months later, it's this sense of urgency of, are we doing enough? Are we going to find them? If we don't act now, is it going to impact things down the road? And it's a really difficult thing to live with. I really have huge sympathy and empathy. Unfortunately, wasn't my family member, so I was a little bit removed, but can at least have a feeling for what it's like to be the parents and immediate family of a missing child.
Mm-hmm. You speak to a lot of things as a young kid that you did, in the leadership, entrepreneurial type realm of business. How do you feel like those skill sets built you to be able to navigate the Elizabeth Smart case?
And this was a little later on, but in one of the communications agencies I worked for, there was a creative man who was sage, I would say, probably 50s, 60s years old. And I asked him one time, what's the secret to success in an agency? Because agencies are very cutthroat, very fast moving, a great place to cut your teeth. And he said, if you can't stay flexible, you'll get bent out of shape, in essence. And it seems so stupid, but it's profound. And I think I learned a lot of that just through the School of Hard Knocks, having those opportunities that, to my parents' credit, my dad was an interesting individual who found and gave me lots of interesting opportunities, but through that had seen what it's like when something's not working, or when I'm on the hot seat, or when there's a problem that has to be solved and no one else can solve it. So I think a lot of those things really helped prepare me for the experience with the Smarts, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I enjoyed a lot when you were writing about how you painted rocks and would go door to door to sell them, because my little heart did that too.
I think a lot of us did. Good to hear. Yes. I wasn't alone.
Yes.
Yeah.
What other things did you enjoy doing and selling just to get yourself out there and seen when you write?
I write in the book about how I was selling everything. I was asking for bottles. I was selling rocks. I was asking for odd jobs. And it got to a point where my mom was like, she could tell the neighbors were annoyed. And my dad and says, look, he can't do this anymore. He's mirroring you. And not only my dad was selling things door to door, but, hustling, constantly finding some side hustle. And my dad responded to that. But yeah, I was anywhere I could make a buck. The family I grew up in was working class, and all throughout, basically spending money, the discretionary funds that I had were funds that I earned, and I like to spend a little bit of money. So I was always hustling to try to make a buck.
Yeah. Did you, during the process of the Elizabeth Smart case, were there a few things that you learned about yourself during that time frame, or was it more things you learned after the fact, or a little bit of both?
I would think both. I was having this conversation with somebody recently just about how we're all flawed and we make mistakes constantly. And during the Smart case, it felt like there was zero room for error. The pressure was immense because one misstep could be the difference between finding or not. And I'm the one holding the microphone. And so that was really difficult. But in the same vein, and maybe at the time feeling that pressure, but also recognizing that we're going to make mistakes. The family's going to make mistakes. Law enforcement's going to make mistakes. And it's how we respond to those mistakes that matters, because the more quickly we can acknowledge and can make adjustments, the better. And we were constantly adjusting and trying to move on instead of dwelling from those. So I think that was an important lesson. Really, I say I learned more about communication, or I learned more about life than communications from that experience. It was like a graduate program in communications. And so there were just so many life lessons about what's most important, how important families are, and seeing how a family, despite their idiosyncrasies, can come together. And I've seen it time and time again. I've been really fortunate to work with a number of families in crises. And it's very rare that families don't rally and that individuals around them don't rally. And that's always one of the most affirming elements of that, is seeing the response. There's always the tragedy, which is just heartbreaking, but seeing how people respond and rise to the occasion and how they support one another, that love is often overlooked. And I saw that day in and day out behind the scenes, and was so impressed with that. And that really touched me, and has been something that has had an influence on my life ever since.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak more to that, Chris? I definitely agree. I love hearing the stories of what actually is bringing communities together during crises, because we don't hear as much of that. But I'd love to hear, what were some opportunities that you had to connect with your community to build and band together?
I mean, this one's so fun right now. I wrote the book not knowing we would have unprecedented snowfall and we'd be in a flood situation and talking about 1983. I wrote about 1983. It was 2 years ago when I wrote the chapter. But I had an experience then where, in the middle of church, somebody came up to the podium and started talking with the bishop or the church leader in my congregation. And there was quite a conversation going on, and everyone was distracted. And finally, they sent us home to go and work on the front lines. And I was too young. I was supposed to be 14, and I begged my dad, and he let me go. And I was part of that effort. And it was incredible to see. Basically, there was no one that morning, and there were more than 10,000 volunteers that searched. There's a different volunteer activity that helped fill bags that day, and being a part of that collective effort as we stood on State Street and saw the water as it started to flow down into the valley, and realizing that we had saved the city. I mean, that was incredible. I think there's so many experiences, and in part, I think all communities are this way, but Utah's and Salt Lake are a little bit unique in that we really come together. It's in our DNA. When there's an opportunity or there's an issue, we rally around people, and we put aside our differences. I mean, that's the greatest element. And I saw that, maybe not trying to derail this too much, but for me, one of the most enduring memories from the SMART case was the search center, and seeing people come together in a very similar way that they did to the flood in 1983. I remember one day watching a guy pull up in this really nice Porsche, and very nicely dressed. And he got up, and I remembered seeing some people get off the shuttle bus that looked like they were homeless. And a little while later, they were sitting around a table together, and there was no judgment. All they cared about was finding Elizabeth. And seeing this happen time and time again, I couldn't run through there and not feel this strong wave of emotion. And it's not that we want tragedy or we want these adversities in life, but they really help us to put aside those things that don't matter. We get so caught up on things that don't matter, and we come together with what does matter. And so it's been fun watching the footage from 83 and reminiscing even more on that, of really how our city came together in a remarkable way and very quickly.
Mm-hmm. How did you feel? So you've been working on this case for 8 to 9 months. How did that feel when you found Elizabeth?
Well, I guess I didn't personally find her, but when she was found, I know that's what you meant.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying.
For that, by any means. That was life-changing. I mean, it was unbelievable. At that time, missing children didn't come back. There may have been a case or two prior to hers, but they were not well known. We've seen a few since then where they've been gone for a long period. There was still strong faith that she would come back. And, there was an attitude of we're not going to give up. We're going to continue to do everything we can. It was kind of on the men. The men in the group would not give up. And the women were like, guys, we need to get real about this. And, we need to curtail this a little bit and make sure that we're not neglecting those things that are most important. And then together there was some tension, but they really worked. But seeing and meeting Elizabeth, maybe telling that story really quick. I had seen Elizabeth at the police station. I'd been called down to the police station because John Walsh, the host of America's Most Wanted at the time, had given me some specific information about victims' rights that he wanted passed on to Ed Smart. And when I passed him on, law enforcement was doing the opposite of everything John had said. And Ed became very angry, and he had to be restrained. And they called me down to the police station. And as I got off the elevator on the 6th floor, there was Elizabeth stepping out of a conference room. And it just didn't feel right in that moment to say anything. And then I was with them a little while later when she was reintroduced to her siblings, when they were reunited with her siblings. Thank you, brain. And then saw that, and again, still wasn't appropriate. So later that night, I was going up to the house because our cell phones were just not working anymore. The batteries were dead, and there were so many calls, we just couldn't even use them. So I went up to strategize for the next day. And as I got up to the porch, it was like out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Ed and Lois were in the front. They were talking to a couple of neighbors, and each of the kids were wearing different colored silk pajamas in the stairs going up to the 4th level of the house. And as I stepped up, I was pretty emotional. Here's this family back together again. And Elizabeth, I saw Elizabeth, and she looked at me and just gave me this odd look. And I'm like, this is really awkward. But fortunately, Ed saw it, and Ed said to Elizabeth, you don't know who this is? And she says, no. And she said, this is Chris. He's like a brother to me. You should consider him one as well. He's done more for you than you can possibly know. And I turned and just sobbed. I was asking Elizabeth about this recently, and she's like, I don't remember you crying. And I said, good. But no, it was a very emotional experience. I mean, one that I don't, there are things personally that would top that, but outside of maybe my immediate and extended family, I don't know what would ever top that experience.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel in that moment or a little bit after like you could breathe a little bit? Was there a little bit of that essence?
Not at all. In fact, I didn't sleep for about 48 hours. Things were so nonstop, and there were so many new pressures at that point. It was probably, a very generous client of mine offered to fly the Smart family and my wife and I to Hawaii for a week and put us up and to get away from everything and get a break. And really the first time that I had a chance to catch my breath was out surfing because I didn't have my cell phone. Now, Elizabeth writes about this, no spoiler here, but she told me about something I didn't know until I read the foreword. But there's a picture of me coming out. In fact, it's on my site, but there's a picture of me coming out of the water holding the surfboard. And just, it was the first time I had ever really let go of everything and forgotten about everything. I don't know how to surf either. So I don't think I caught many waves, but just being out in the surf and having that break and that serenity was, I look at that often. I think it's something that reminds me that I need to take breaks, and we need that serenity, regardless of if it was 9.5, 10 months of craziness, or if it was, if it's just a busy period in life.
Mm-hmm. The metaphor to releasing it all within the water. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
Growing up, you had a phone chat with Larry H. Miller. How did that conversation change your perspective during that time?
Well, to give a little background on that, Larry H. Miller was in the process of buying the Jazz, and I was this huge Jazz fan. It was like my life was the Utah Jazz, and so my parents were preparing me. This was back in '84. The team was going to be sold. There were two groups that were bidding on it, one from Minneapolis and one from Miami, and they were going to be moved out of state. And at the 11th hour, Larry steps forward, and I hear on the radio that he's close to securing a loan, and they'll know by 5 o'clock that evening at the deadline. And I call my grandfather and beg him to take me to the Jazz game that night, and we go. And right before the game starts, they announce that he saves the team. And my grandfather had made a deal with me. He would take me to the game if I wrote a story about it for my 6th grade newspaper. I was one of the reporters in my elementary school. And so he gave me a ballpoint pen and a little notebook, and I was taking notes on everything. And when we got back from the game, my mom, she's telling my mom about it. And my mom said, well, you ought to call Larry Miller and get an interview. And it's like, are you crazy, Mom? He's not going to talk to me. He's the busiest guy in the world. And the next morning, she pulled the phone book out and dialed his number and handed me the phone. And I kind of muddled through it, and his secretary took my name and number, and I refused to go to school. And a couple of hours later, he called me. They were waiting for him to come out and sign the papers and do the official press conference announcing that he was the owner. And he's doing this interview with me, which was just absolutely incredible. And he couldn't have been kinder. But at the end of that, Larry gave me a piece of advice, and he asked me the question of, why, do you know why I did this interview with you? And I was like, no, because you're really nice. And he said, no, because you asked. And I want to teach you that lesson, that never be afraid to ask. The worst thing that can happen is somebody says no, but you never know when you're going to get a scoop. And that's what you got. You got the first story. You got the scoop on this. And that stuck with me. I can't say I'm terrific at always asking, but it's amazing how often there opportunities exist that we either feel like we're not good enough for, or we're putting somebody out, and we don't open the door by asking. And so that was a huge piece. And there were a number of experiences with the SMART case where asking was very important.
Mm-hmm. Always be willing to ask. I loved that line in your book as well. What are a few experiences that have positively impacted you to where you are right now today?
My mother always taught me to be different, and always, almost to a fault. I think growing up, I was this peculiar kid that liked things that I loved the nightly news. Second grade, I could tell you just about everything that had happened locally and nationally. Quirky stuff. But my mom taught me to always look at things and think about things differently, to analyze things differently, to try to make friends who are different than me, which I think here in Utah, that almost goes against the grain sometimes. I think oftentimes people are taught to stick together and stay with those who are the same. Be yourself and know who you are, and in the same vein, get out there. And so that really helped. That always helped me. There were always little things where it was never good enough with my mom, as far as like, okay, there's a report on something, and I would want to do the easy way out, and there was always something that had to be added, whether it was dressing up in costume as the person that I was report about to give the report, or there was one on an animal, and she's like, what's the most, I think I wanted to do a kangaroo, and she said, everyone's going to do a kangaroo. What's an odd animal that no one's going to do something on? I said a squid. And so the next thing I know, we're driving to the market, and she's buying this squid, and it was, my mom was a teacher, and is still a teacher, I guess, to a degree, but had been an elementary school teacher and was a phenomenal teacher. Experiences with her were big. My dad and his eccentric hustles and things like that, I think those always did. I write in the book about my father set me up with a night crawler business where I caught night crawlers at night, and I had, back then even, I had more freedom than just about anybody. I was out on my own walking through the neighborhood and going on these crazy adventures, catching crawlers, and staying up late and things like that. But my parents gave me a lot of freedom. When I first looked at the book, I actually looked at potentially writing about helicopter parents, and how the things that I experienced wouldn't have happened if my parents had been, so strict and didn't give me the opportunity to learn and grow and get outside of my comfort zone. And it really changed my perspective on parenting when I started to think about that. Like, okay, I might not give quite as much leeway to my kids, but they need those opportunities to get out there and have the opportunity to explore and learn and grow and make mistakes as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that you mentioned that, because that leads right into my next question of how can parents gain awareness, but in a healthy way, so that their children do have that ability to grow, learn for themselves, stretch and fly, but also make sure that they are protected as well.
We look at the Elizabeth Smart case, and I don't want to make light of that because, I saw it firsthand. I saw how difficult and how incredibly taxing that is. And having worked some of these cases, I never want that to happen to anyone. The odds are so small. 100 children are abducted by strangers annually in the United States. Got to figure there's at least 100 million kids, if not more.
Mm.
So it's about 1 in a million chance that your child could get taken. And I'm always a percentage guy. So, whether it's traveling somewhere that's supposedly dangerous, I want to see how many tourists have been injured or killed in that area in the past 1 to 5 years. Well, what are my odds that something's going to happen? Because often when you look at those odds, it should give you, it could happen 1 in a million, but am I willing with my children, am I willing to not let them go out and explore the neighborhood because there's a 1 in a million chance that something will happen? I try to keep that in my head. If I can play that percentage game, that helps. I had my mom, I can't remember exactly what the situation. I think my 2 youngest were 4 or 5, and she came and said, "I can't believe that you would do that." And I said, "What?" And she's like, "Didn't you work on Elizabeth Smart?" Anyone, would let that happen. But I really think we have, as parents, if we play the odds, there's such a greater chance that they're going to have an experience that's going to be life affirming or is going to prepare them for something in the future. The percentage chance of that is exponentially greater than something bad happening. Mm-hmm. Heaven forbid, knock on wood, right? Things can still happen. Don't get me wrong. But I think we, especially as Generation X parents, we have a tendency, we are cynical. We're a little bit controlling because our parents gave us a lot of leeway. I can't say that I'm not at times, but I really try to be cognizant of it. I think that's the most important thing, Lori, is just recognizing that we are doing our children a disservice and our peers are doing the exact same thing. And we need to give them more levity. The thing I love though is my kids, my youngest is 7. She has a Gab watch, right? So I know, and I have to tell myself like, well, she's got the Gab watch. I can call her and we can track her. So you can spend a little money, not very much, and have a little bit of peace of mind. Technology's given us some peace of mind. Knowing cameras are everywhere should be some peace of mind, but we really need to let go. And I say that because there's a lot of room for me to improve in that area as well.
Mm-hmm. We're going to turn it to the inner child question segment. Are you ready, Chris?
Let's go. Here we go.
First question. What were some of the food items that you enjoyed most as a kid at barbecues?
At barbecues. I had this strange affinity to peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And it was peanut butter and jelly, and then it was chocolate. Those two things, like at school, they would, what do you have in your lunch? Peanut butter and jelly. What do you have for dinner? Peanut butter and jelly. So a strange thing I ate at a barbecue. I'm sure I had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because it was kind of my trademark.
Mm-hmm. What kind of jelly did you like? Was it the grape, the raspberry?
The raspberry with the seeds, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is the good stuff. Yes.
I still love that. Still my favorite.
Okay, so on peanut butter, was it smooth or crunchy?
I liked crunchy. I like texture. I think in all things, a little texture is good.
Yes. Second question. You loved basketball growing up. What did you love most about it?
There were times playing basketball you can do by yourself.
Mm.
And also you can train by yourself. And I, at times had periods where there weren't a lot of kids around. So it was something that I could always do. It was something I could compete at. I was tall as well. In a place where I really saw the merits of hard work. I was not naturally gifted athletically. It took me a lot of hard work I wasn't very coordinated. I tripped over my own foot until probably 4th or 5th grade. But it gave me an outlet. It gave me something to work at, to learn from, and to enjoy the competition of it as well. So basketball was a real key part of my life. And I've seen this with my own kids. I've tried not to push them too hard. I have one son who plays basketball. I have one that golfs, another that's kind of figuring it out, but plays football. But having something that they're passionate about, something that they want to work on, not that dad wants to push them on, but something that they really want to do. And that through hard work, they can see themselves improve and advance. So for me, fortunately, basketball was that outlet.
Mm-hmm. Did you find yourself, Chris, when you were doing basketball and working on that, every step that you took? Was it just that growth step again of seeing what you were made of and what you're capable of?
Absolutely. I think you see that incrementally. And as like sixth, seventh grade, as they started to play more competitively, it's nothing like it is today. Today it is nuts. It's so over the top. Sorry to my son's AAU coaches who I love, but it's so over the top now. But yeah, I mean, you see that having that opportunity to put the hard work in, and even in small doses, see some improvement. It fuels it. And that's true with life or writing, right? I mean, the other thing I grew up doing was writing. I love to write. And as I was cleaning out some files recently, found all kinds of things, found all the poems from my junior year of high school when I got a D in math because the classroom overlooked Mount Olympus and I couldn't focus on math, but the poems were great. But I mean, like writing, it's the same thing. You'll never become, maybe you become, I don't know, an expert in it, but you become proficient in it, but you're constantly, challenging yourself. And I think that's something. I enjoy the challenge. I enjoy the opportunity to try to get better at something and try to learn from those around me who are better at it or have different experience that I can apply.
Mm-hmm. I would have been distracted right there with you, Chris, writing poetry if I saw Mount Olympus out the window.
Like the worst possible desk I could have had.
Were you right next to the window?
Yeah, I was right next to the window and just gone every day, gone. Perfect view.
What is the oddest food combo that you've liked and tried or you've just tried?
So food combo, and I'm trying to think what I comboed it with. I lived in South Korea for quite a while, and live octopus is a delicacy. And so eating live octopus, which they eat them whole sometimes, and people actually die from eating them whole if they open up while they're in your esophagus. Mm-hmm. They usually cut them up. But this is probably too gross, but having tentacles in your mouth that are grabbing your tongue and your cheeks, that was pretty wild. I'm trying to think if there was a combination of that. I don't think I put it in a peanut butter jelly sandwich or anything. Maybe that's more strange food than combos.
That was pretty good, Chris. Like the whole visual there, you totally got us.
Hopefully to make you sick. Yeah. I actually enjoyed eating it. I don't know why. It was because it's a crazy experience.
So you did try it?
Multiple times.
Okay. And you're here. So
I'm here. I never tried the full octopus. No, not a chance.
So now was that a tester that you're going to do octopus in peanut butter and jelly for your next extravagant meal? Absolutely.
Probably squid. We should put squid in peanut butter and jelly. Tie those two things from third grade together and I'll try it. I'll try just about it. I love to travel, and there are a few things I haven't tried, but usually we'll try just about everything. I enjoy the experience. And so there's probably lots of odd combinations I'm not even thinking of. That's one of my favorite parts about going somewhere new. Even in the United States, there's different areas where you can get different cuisines, and I'm one for, I have a diverse palate. There's really nothing I can think of that I don't like.
Okay, so a third grade dish, you'll have to make a name for it and then, share it with us all when you go through that experience.
There's something. There you go.
Before we end today, Chris, what advice can you give our listeners and viewers on living a creatively abundant life?
I love this question. And creative abundance is something, I feel like I was raised by two parents who were creative in different ways. And so I grew up in a very creative environment, and it's something that fuels me to this day. And so that abundance, it's looking at things differently. Had this really cool experience a few years ago. Went to an event, and I knew a few people there. And I'm just like, on this day, I'm just like, I'm going to find the person that is most different from me, and I'm going to make friends with them. And this guy had huge hair and this huge beard and tats, and he was the coolest guy I've ever met, the most interesting person I've ever met. And so being creative is being willing to look at things different, being courageous enough to go and be a part of something that's different. And oftentimes creativity is just seeing the world and applying that just a little bit differently. So that would be my long answer, Lori, but I love that question.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. It has been an absolute pleasure. Where can we find you if we have any questions after the show, or if our viewers would like to get a copy of Unexpected?
Absolutely. So I'm on social media. You can find me there. I also have a website, christhomasconnects.com. And one of the fun things about the website, if you've read the book, is I've gone back and pulled a number of the videos from the SMART case. I have a video of Baker in there as well. And so a few of the elements, some kind of additional items that bring some of the stories together. It's available anywhere you buy books, Amazon. I also voiced, I know people here, it seems like everyone's on Audible now. So I voiced the Audible. So if my voice hasn't driven you crazy yet, you can go get the audio book and listen to me for 9.5 hours more.
Perfect. And we will put the links down below. Are you doing book clubs right now, Chris?
I am. I'm glad you asked that. Yeah. And I'm happy to come in and do a 20 or 30 minute Q&A virtually. If you have a book club, feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to actually post today. I did my first one last Thursday and I have 3 or 4 this week. And it was so much fun. I had such a great time. This group had been together. These women had been together for 20 years and had phenomenal questions and made me think about things that I hadn't. And I wrote the book. So anyway, welcome the opportunity. Anyone out there that has a book club and is thinking of reading it, I would welcome the opportunity to be a part of that.
I will absolutely be reaching out to you. And this book is 100% fantastic book club read to have all of those different conversations and questions that we talked about today and then some. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much again, Chris, for being here. It has been wonderful chatting with you today. And thank you for all of those who've watched this live and will be watching on the replay. Remember, as you go about the rest of your week, to find the things that are working within your life. You are the creator of your own story. What steps will you take next? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Lori.